Hello, my name is Janice B. Gordon. This is Scale Your Sales podcast. Welcome to the Scale Your Sales podcast, listed number 9 of 42 best podcasts for every sales professional in 2021. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recommended by LinkedIn as one of 15 innovative sales influencers to follow in 2021. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast, my guest is a sales enablement pro, but not only a pro, more of a Jedi master. So she shared her experience as a senior sales leader. She said that she's been on the buyer side and on the seller side, but really helped organizations to implement sales enablement programs. So talked about some of the pitfalls, also talking about diversity and her hopes for diverse teams and why it's really important, shared her 3 pillars. And one of them is really about being focused on your customer, being focused on, applying empathy, really understanding them, but also their future as well, setting goals as well, and really being focused on the strategic goals, not only your internal as a seller, but also the customer's strategic goals when you're creating a sales enablement program. So there's so much that's packed into this. So she's a dedicated and passionate and results-driven sales leader with an extensive experience in sales. So my next guest has led global business sales enablement programs from inception to successful conclusion across organizations like Expedia, Deliveroo, and Vodafone. Experienced in working and directing diverse sales teams globally, she has been awarded Enablement Executive of the Year, SE Pro, Sales Enablement Pro 2022. Welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, Laura Valerio.
Thank you, Janice. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast, because I know that you got the Sales Enablement of the Year Pro 2022. So it's such an honor having you here, and you've done great things with Vodafone, and I know that we'll talk about that. So as a master Jedi in sales enablement, what I'd really like to ask you is really, what are the pitfalls that you see other organizations, what pitfalls do they fall into, and perhaps, how you manage to avoid them to have the great success?
That's a great question. I've not just seen, I've experienced some of the pitfalls, and I have to say it's not just the company. Sometimes it's on the sales enabler experience, really to educate the company on how to best implement a sales enablement function. Sales enablement is a new function, especially in Europe. I started here back in 2016. After an extensive experience in sales, I joined and I discovered my passion for sales enablement. I had big learnings in my career. So what companies tend to do when they establish a sales enablement function is to give you a long list of problems or things to solve, as if you were the expert of the broken things. And so one of my first approaches was, okay, let's go through that list. And let's make sure that I solve for all these issues so I can build my trust and credibility across the sales leadership team. What happened was that at the beginning, everyone was really happy, and I received a lot of positive comments, and I thought, wow, I'm going in the right direction. But because this list was never ending, actually a lot of more issues or challenges were thrown to sales enablement. I went back with a plan, and I said, hey, I need more resources and I need more budget because I need to do X, Y, Z. But because I was doing my work so well, nobody was seeing the need for change. Nobody was seeing the need of, changing the way I was solving for things. I was a great problem solver. And so I thought I needed to take a step back and think about, what am I doing wrong? Why people are not seeing the North Star? And that's when I really learned that taking a step back and getting to a more strategic approach is the best way to avoid pitfall, and to avoid that the function is just seen as a very tactical function to say, hey, my sellers don't know how to position this product, and here is the training. Or, for example, my sellers cannot find the content. Oh, here is the new technology that can help you find the content easily. But actually, what you need to do is to step back from all these requests and one, understand your final outcome. What's destination? What is it that you want to achieve? And on the other side, take the time to analyze the current situation so that before you start climbing that mountain, you know exactly, what are the actions that you need to do to climb the mountain. But the vision and mountain need to be the first thing you think about. And then you re-engineer the process back. And then you need to think about, okay, what are the initiatives that I need to build? What are the capabilities? And, how do I create the strong foundations for this new function to really succeed? And it's by selling the vision, selling the impact, that you can really avoid all the different pitfalls that are, part of a new function that is about to, I would say, that has just born.
Do you know, I think it's really interesting that when you're given this list of tactical things to do, it's really difficult to prioritize. Whereas actually you're saying that's the mistake many companies make. And you can't break out of that because, as you say, you're solving for these little tactical things and there's no real priority. And you're solving the problem, but you're actually losing the war, aren't you? Yeah. And so I understand you've got to start at a strategic level, and that helps you to prioritize this tactical list. What's important and what really isn't important in getting you to your ultimate goal. I really love that, because it's not just in sales enablement. That's really in all transformational program. If you want something to change, you've really got to start with, where do you want to get to? What's the outcome? What's the big vision? And even when you're talking to your customers as well, you need to understand, what is their big vision? What are they trying to do? Before you actually come up with a solution. And I think that's the problem with often salespeople that have a product, selling a product or service. They're very focused on selling that without the big picture of what the ultimate goal of the customer is trying to achieve. So I think that relates on several different levels.
Yeah, it's about, for example, some of the big blockers to the enablement function are the silo approach. Or, for example, like a company where you don't have clear roles or responsibilities or clear processes. It's very hard because enablement is a collaborative discipline. And so if you don't have this, or if you don't create this culture of collaboration within the company, it becomes really difficult to work as a function, to succeed as a function. And especially, I like when you bring up the customer. The customer is actually our main objective, and it's all about providing our customer the best customer experience. And I can only do that if I really understand what the customer wants, and ultimately what my customer's customer want.
Yeah, I love that. And companies are often so internally focused on their tactical problem, solving this. If we solve this, we'll be fine. But actually, the goal, and so you're right, it's not just then the seller's goal that is the priority, but actually what's the point in the seller's goal, and if it doesn't meet the outcomes of their key customers, and their customers are trying to meet the outcomes of their customers. So which one takes priority? Is it the internal ultimate goal? Yeah, you've got shareholders, or actually is it the customers ultimate outcomes. That, you know, should be the priority, because then if you solve for that, you're going to meet your business goals, aren't you?
Yeah, and actually the two things should go in parallel. If you think about, so I was reading one of the last Forrester report that was saying that after the pandemic, in 63% of the cases of the buying processes have more than 4 people within the organization involved in the buying process. When you think about, from a sales enablement perspective, to enable your sellers to sell, it's not just about enabling the immediate buyer, but it's about enabling, you know, everyone who is part of this customer experience. It's about knowing what finance think about your solution, or what procurement think. And it's about being able to identify who are my stakeholders across in my customers that I need to go and influence. But at the same time, within the company, if we don't have this culture of collaboration across sellers, finance, and all the cross functions that collaborate with the seller, it's very difficult to provide this consistent experience to our customers. And I've been a buyer before becoming a seller. And this has been one of the, you know, experiences that has been eye-opening for me, because as a buyer, I really understood when I was pitching solutions that I wanted to buy across my organizations. I needed to educate my organization, and for example, I needed to educate finance, I needed to educate product, I needed to educate marketing about why that solution would have been a game changer for that company. So if you shift perspective and you now become a seller, you need to understand not just what the immediate buyer wants, but what the organization that is behind the buyer is thinking about it. What are the potential challenges? How can I educate my immediate buyer to sell my solution across their organization?
Yeah, and who, you're right, and who they're actually selling it to, because if they're having to sell it to finance, the way they communicate it, what's going to be important to their internal customers in finance is going to be different to marketing. They're all measured by slightly different KPIs. Correct. And so even though you've got one business goal, they're all looking at it from different perspectives because they have different measures. So it's using those right drivers for the right departments. Interesting.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the experiences that I was developing at Vodafone was how working together, sales enablement and marketing, working together on enabling sellers to pitch to different personas within the organization. What does a CFO cares about versus, for example, what does a CMO cares about? And so one is more about efficiencies. How can I reduce cost? And the CMO is, how can I offer better experience to my customer? How can I increase conversion? And so it's really making sure that, you know, when you work with your customers, you take a holistic approach. And you look at the buying process end to end, and you really understand your customers in and out.
I was reading from your notes about your key pillars. Can you explain a little bit about that? You say it's always been your thinking about customers to use these 3 pillars. I really loved it.
When I think about creating a great customer experience, I always think about these 3 pillars. And the first one is about having a holistic approach. Really know your customers and understand, you know, what are their challenges, but also thinking inside the company, you know, what is happening, what could be the potential concerns or opportunities that you want to explore. And make sure that internally you educate not just the sellers to develop their own skills and capabilities and tools, but it's an organizational effort to provide this experience to customers. The second pillar is about empathy. And especially during the pandemic, it's not just about selling products, but it's a lot. It's what I thought it came even more important is the service that you provide, but it's also understanding their challenges and listening to, what are the issues that they need to solve, and be there for them throughout their challenge, and especially the ability of providing them with either answers or support when they need it. And the third one that I think is really important is about helping them see the future. It's make sure that you make their life easier, I say. And what is really important here, usually when you are a seller, you have the privilege of seeing the different trends in the market. You have the privilege to see what are the buyers' behaviors that are changing, and what are my customers' preferences. And it's about to share, and to have an open and honest communication with your customer about what is happening, and help them see the future. And potentially, if you have these open and honest conversations, you can start thinking about how your solution and their solution can be put together to co-innovate. So I had these three pillars, and what I've seen in my experience is that it helps not just having happy customers, both new or existing ones, but the customers then become your promoters. They become your advocates, and that's when they start promoting your business to other customers. So, and as I said, I was experiencing it both as a buyer and as a seller. I have great experiences as a buyer and great experiences as a seller as well.
But you found your love, which is sales enablement, hey?
Yes. It's so like being a multiplier. And yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, your three pillars and what you say, that, if you create happy customer experiences, but then coming back into kind of like the sellers and the sales environment. And I know as a sales leader, have often been the only woman in the room. And through all the years, whether on the buying side or the selling side, I'm interested in your experience of working in sales, and whether you feel that there's a way to go in terms of like diversity and allowing more people access to this great industry.
That's a great question. And actually, what I've seen is that diversity has not progressed as fast as technology. And have a little story that happened to me a year ago, and where so in my sales enablement team, I was the only one with a sales background. And so I was preparing a presentation to educate them on what's the life of a salesperson. How do they prepare for a meeting, or how do they consume content, and so on. And I usually do very visual presentations. So I was Googling the icon for a salesperson, and you can do it yourself. You can go to Google and Google icon for a salesperson. I wanted to put this in my slide. And what I discovered is that 90% of the icons were men. And I had a haha moment thinking, oh, wow, even the icons are more men than women. And so it's when you think about, where we are, we are a little bit behind of where I thought we would have been nowadays in integrating more women in the workforce, especially because it's proven that when you have women in sales, your win rate improves and your quota attainment improves. So I'm a big fan of diversity and boosting diversity. And what I have is I've been lucky in my career to being a salesperson in a company that was doing a conscious effort about integrating more women and reward women in different stages of their life for their efforts. So I still remember that I was 8 months pregnant. I had an evening, I was alone, I was on the sofa, and I was a big, FOMO moment. I was missing. It was a big event happening in my company where hundreds of people were meeting for an offsite, and that was the award evening, and I wasn't there. And so I was just thinking, who will they recognize? Who will they reward? And in that moment, I received a call, and it was my boss. He, at the time he said, Laura, it's me, and you are now in front of the whole EMEA team, and we want to tell you that you won that prize. And I won the business and developer of the year for the EMEA region. And this gave me such a big emotion, not just because I was awarded a prize, but because it was a particular moment in my life. And I could see that that company was, was recognizing my effort and was really thinking about, diversity in all sorts and forms, and how diversity can have some implications in life and in your work life. And so I know it's quite of a unique case. We need to have more of that, because the story that I've heard are not like that one. And that's why I'm sharing this story, because I would like that more company think about how can I just not do a conscious effort to boost diversity, but how can I promote it? How can I make sure that this becomes part of our culture?
Yeah, that's a great story, because you and I have heard so many horrendous stories of women that are pregnant, or when they go back into the workplace, and how they're overlooked for promotion, or just horrendous stories that. And we're not talking 10 years ago, we're talking present day. We hear it all the time. And these are stories that we share amongst ourselves, but we don't share it in the wider market. We don't share it with other, many men are completely unaware of these things unless they're actually in that situation, going for the same job and getting it over someone else that might be on maternity leave. And then when they come back. So it's horrendous what happens, what many women have to put up with. And so we do need to be talking about it more openly, so those that are not aware become aware of it as well. So yeah, I agree with you. This is why I asked the question on the podcast, because I want a diversity of views and experiences, and we need to talk about this so much more. So I really do appreciate you sharing your own experiences. So what tried and tested strategy would you offer listeners to enable them to scale their sales?
Oh, wow. One of there are many ways in which you can scale your sales. And one of the easy way to scale your sales is through a very clear and repeatable process. So one story that I have on scaling sales is linked to my recent experience at Vodafone. And we had to, one of the main needs was about how do we accelerate pipeline, and how do we, develop our accounts more strategically. And so what we did, we started from this need, and we developed a program to help our sellers to think more strategically, and to develop our accounts in a way that was consistent, a consistent thinking across the company. So the first thing that we did was to go through the actual process and map it and digitalize it and make it consistent, and really understand what were the challenges that sales were facing when developing an account. And for example, what we discovered talking to sales And getting their feedback was that they were actually not, they were more managing accounts rather than developing them. And the tools that they were using were all sorts of forms that were offline. It was very hard then to collaborate, and also there was not one consistent methodology across all of them. So what we did is we took all this feedback, and it's what we heard. And then as sales enablers, we played a big role in putting a structure in place, a process. And the first thing that we did, it was like clarify roles and responsibilities. What's the role of a salesperson versus the service team versus the product team, and so on. So clarify roles and responsibilities, and then digitalize the process and make sure that it was easy for the sales team to adopt the new CRM and to use the new CRM to put all their information or start getting insights from customers from the CRM. And at the same time, we developed two types of training, one for the sales managers and one for the sales team, so that the sales manager could really become the coach and they could become the activators of this change. And so we acted on different levels, the technology, the process, the people. And what we found out is that enablement creates the shell, it's the facilitator. But the real people who drove the change were the sales managers. It was them who drove the adoption of the new process and the new technology, and who started looking at the data. And because we had all the data in one place, they also boosted a culture of collaboration. So when it was about thinking, how do we develop this customer? It was not just sales, but there was service, there was customer success, and all that. It was easier to share the information and create this collaboration across teams that could look at the customer from different angles and put a new perspective. So my suggestion, if I have to, to somebody who is new and is thinking about how do I scale, is pick the process that you think would drive the, the quickest and highest growth, and think about how can you make it scalable and repeatable and consistent across the organization.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Laura. So if you're on a desert island, what is the one thing you would take with you?
So you would be surprised. I would take a phone with me. And the reason why is not because I'm mobile addicted. It's the true reason is that I'm people addicted. I'm one of those people who really likes being with people, working with them or with friends and family. It's it's the energy, it's the warmth, it's especially on the work side, is the co-creation. That's why I'm missing the office in this moment. It's like this moment of collaboration in which you put a lot of ideas together to innovate.
Lovely, lovely. I'm going to send over some people to your house. Don't you worry, you'll never be alone again. All right?
And I will be ready,
I might be bringing a bottle of champagne with them, though.
And being Italian, I will bring the food.
Yeah, there you go.
Perfect.
So how can listeners get hold of you?
It's very easy. I'm on LinkedIn. And I would say that's the social channel that I use the most. So please, look at my profile on LinkedIn, reach out to me. And if you have any questions, ping me anytime. I'm very, very happy to be connected.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much for giving us your insight and experience of working as a buyer and seller and sales enablement, in which you love and highly, highly commended. So thank you for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast, Laura Valerio.
Thank you very much, Janice. A pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the Caption Show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.